My name is Siddharth, and I will be talking about our case study, Marching with the Pink Parade, evaluating visual search recommendations for non-binary clothing items. Fashion and clothing are a form of self-expression and as such cannot be restricted to a single definition. This holds especially true when society attempts to design and define clothing only in terms of binary genders and rejects non-binary clothing preferences or choices. E-commerce platforms have become the de facto standard of shopping, especially due to the COVID-19 pandemic. While general members of society are able to access these services fairly easily, marginalized individuals may face issues even here due to the pre-existing biases on such platforms. In this study, we evaluate visual search recommendations for non-binary clothing on e-commerce platforms. Visual search works by taking an image of a clothing item as input on a website or a mobile app and showing relevant recommendations. Thus, visual search allows customers to search for items they may not know the name of, or if textual search is not available in their language of choice. We evaluate the visual search recommendations for 3 e-commerce platforms. The first is Amazon's Style Snap. While Amazon does identify the input, it does not provide any labels for the item of clothing it has identified, and even in this particular example, although the input is non-binary, the outputs are highly male-centric. The next is Beagle.vision, which, unlike Amazon, not only provides a label for the input clothing item, but also recommends similar clothing as the input. We also notice that the platform does not make any assumptions about the gender of the person in the image. The third platform we evaluate is Like That. Here, the platform not only provides labels for the clothing items, but also has an option for unisex clothing. This can be interpreted as a slightly fairer, non-binary experience to the shopper. Similar to Beagle.vision, the recommendations are more relevant to the input. Thus, each of these platforms takes an image of the clothing item as input and shows the recommendations it deems as relevant. To perform this study, we curated a dataset of images comprised of various types of clothing items like suits, dresses, and casual wear, and labeled them as male-centric, female-centric, and non-binary. We then passed these images to the 3 e-commerce platforms described above. The top 5 recommendations for each input were collected and added to a Google form which had the following questions on relevance to the gender category and to the input image itself. Finally, this Google form was shared with survey participants and their responses were recorded, which we discuss now in the form of results. Moving on to the results, we first talk about the most frequent gender option chosen by the participants. We defined 3 clothing types for the input images: male-centric, female-centric, and non-binary. Similarly, for the recommendations, the survey form has 3 gender options to choose from: male only, female only, and non-binary. Observing the aggregated results, we can see that roughly half of the responses correspond to the gender category of the input image, with females being as high as 63%. This confirms our own assumptions about the category divisions of the input dataset. Further, when we look at the individual platforms, we see that Amazon and Like That perform similar to the overall results, whereas survey participants feel that Beagle's recommendations to male-centric inputs are more non-binary. Further in-depth results can be found in our paper. We next look at the average ratings that the survey participants give to the top 5 recommendations. The recommendations for the male-centric clothing inputs receive the highest average rating, followed closely by the female-centric clothing inputs, with the non-binary recommendations receiving the lowest rating. This shows that all the platforms are optimized to recommend clothes for binary clothing images, but this does not hold true for non-binary recommendations. One takeaway from this result is that the recommendations are not received well by the participants, especially for non-binary clothing. Next, we compare the original ranking of the top 5 recommendations against the ranking given by the participants using the relevance score as an indicator for rank. We observe that for a majority of the platforms, the participants rank the recommendations in the opposite order of what the platforms show. This is especially true for non-binary clothing. We conclude that even if the recommendations are relevant to the input, the e-commerce platform's choice of ordering is not preferred by the customers and may affect their shopping experience. Finally, we take a look at the responses of the male participants compared to the female ones. For the recommendations of the binary clothing inputs, male participants choose the binary option more frequently, with the values being 76% for the male-centric items and 86% for the female-centric ones. On the other hand, for the same binary clothing inputs, the females have a more non-binary opinion, choosing the non-binary label at least 75% of the times. This is a very good example of user interaction bias, which can be attributed to the self-selected biases that the participants may have. From all the above results, we may conclude that the current e-commerce shopping environment is not designed well for non-binary shoppers who already face discrimination in brick-and-mortar stores. We hope that this in-depth study would allow such platforms to take cognizance of their current biases and improve their systems. For more details about our work, please check out the paper and connect with us through email or Twitter. Thank you.